Hello, Julie here and welcome to my YouTube channel. I created this layout for the Cybercrop over at Mystical Scrapbooks, and this particular challenge requires you to use one stencil, and I'm using a Dusty Attic stencil. Also calls for two mediums, so I'm using ink and modelling paste, and three colours, and my three colours are green, or sort of a minty green, grey and white. The paper I'm using is from this creative pack from Uniquely Creative called Choose Your Own Adventure. I'm using these two 4x4 photos on my layout. They are very dark. So I'm going to start with this Dusty Attic stencil. It's called Criss. You will find links below to all of the things that I use into the Mystical shop. I'm also using my Montmartre modelling paste, and I'm going to apply a coat of the modelling paste just randomly on my background through that stencil. I'm using modelling paste because it dries white, and I want it to stand out on the background. Once my modelling paste was dry, I used my archival ink in a colour called Watering Can, which is a grey, and I used a blending tool to apply the ink through the same stencil that I used for the modelling paste, which was of course the Dusty Attic Criss, I think it was called. Yeah, Criss. I also used the same ink and blending tool to run around the edge of my layout to give it a bit of a border. Just did around the edge. I wasn't too fussy about whether it came over the front or how far it came over the front, just something to define the outline. I used an emery board to file around my photos to give them a bit of definition as well. Okay, I'm going to start cutting my papers now. This first paper, which is going to be the biggest paper on the layout, it's from the paper called the Story Layer Cuts. These on the back of this there are layer cuts that you can fussy cut out, but on this side, the back side, is a white with a black grid line on it. So I've cut that piece that is 6 inches by 10 inches. This next piece of paper that I'm going to use is called Journey, and I'm going to actually use both sides of this paper. So I'm going to cut two pieces, 10 inches by 1 3/4 inches. The last piece I'm going to use for this part of the layout is from Ready Go, and I'm going to cut that so that it's 1.5 inches wide and 8.5 inches long. Now I'm bringing in some plain grey cardstock. So I've got my green and I've got my white, and some of that green paper has a bit of grey in it as well. So these are my three colours, as I said. First of all, I'm going to cut a strip that is 1.5 inches wide, and I'm going to use a die to cut this into a scalloped pattern. The die I'm using is a La La Land scalloped border die, and because it's not a full 12 inch, I have to actually join the two pieces together. So I'm using my glue to make sure that I line each of the patterns up perfectly. Using glue lets me have that little bit of wriggle room. I cut a 2 inch by 1 inch piece of the grey cardstock as well, and cut a fishtail into one of the 2 inch ends. So this section of my layout is coming together, and you can see a bit of an idea here of what I plan on doing. Time now to ink the edges of all of my papers. I'm using a Papercraft black ink cube to do that with. So I've attached double-sided tape to all of my pattern papers, and it's time now to start assembling my layout. I've attached my photos to some chipboard scraps so that they stand up a bit higher than the other papers on the layout. I wanted to add some stitching to my layout, so I took my layout to my sewing machine and I added stitching around all of the pattern papers and the page itself. A little tip, if you are going to do stitching, I would suggest that you take your single sheets to the sewing machine and stitch around them before you add them to your layout. To embellish my page, I went to the cut apart sheet. It's called the Story Laser Cuts. There's several different sheets in this pack, so I just hunted through all of them, picked out some of the things that I liked and cut them out, and I've made a little cluster in the bottom right hand section of the layout and a few other little embellishments throughout the layout. So I've got a little tab above the top photo, a little another little embellishment between the two photos, and a little pennant down the bottom on top of the grey one that I created earlier. To create the little cluster, I cut a piece of the Journey pattern paper so that it was 3.5 inches by 1.25. That was my base, and then I just used a few more of the cut aparts from the story sheet and layered them on top of it. The tag, I cut that down to size so it was a lot longer than that. Then I've inked around the edge of all of them, of course, and now I'm just using glue to attach them to my page. These photos were taken when we were on a cruise in 2006. There were 8 of us in the group, so I don't know what happened to the photos for the other people, but I don't seem to have them. Anyway, this was formal night. To create my title, I'm going to use these white sticker letters that I bought at my local scrapbooking store. I don't know, there's no brand or anything like that on them, so I'm not sure what they are. I've attached those to some of the plain grey cardstock, and I'm going to just play around with where I want to place this. Once I've made my mind up, I'm going to add a bit of chipboard to the left-hand part of the title because it's going to go above, like it's going to overlap the photo, so if I don't put chipboard behind it, it will tilt. And then I'm going to attach that. I'm going to handwrite the date that the photo was taken, or the photos were taken, on just under the bottom photo. That completes my layout for today, so all the links will be in the description box below, so pop over to Mystical Scrapbooks and check out their cyber crop. I'm sure you'll love the challenges, and thank you for being here and watching my video, and I hope you can join me for my next video.